like the spinal column of Giacometti's Palace at 4 a.m. Circles, like lenses or the radiographer's target indicated in Clark's book, lend focus to the figures, the slight distortion of George Dyer's face at left echoing the blurring created by the curve of optical glass. The similar exposure of the spine in Figure Writing Reflected in a Mirror of 1976 reflects the impact of Edgar Degas' After Bath of 1903. You must know the beautiful Degas pastel of a woman sponging her back, and you will find at the very top of the spine that the spine almost comes out of the skin altogether, and this gives it such a grip and twist that you're more conscious of the vulnerability of the rest of the body than if he had drawn the spine naturally up to the neck. In my case, these things have been influenced by X-ray photographs. The intertwined figures of Bacon's paintings embrace or struggle within the confines of this predicament. Studies from the Human Body, 1975. In Triptych, Studies of the Human Body of 1979, the nudes in the central canvas are flanked by two male figures, derived from the nude figures of Day and Twilight that face each other on the tombs of Giuliano and Lorenzo de' Medici in Michelangelo's Medici's Chapel of 1519-1534. A gash mars the back of the left-hand figure in Bacon's painting, the one related to Michelangelo's Day, as if to render human the marble-like flesh. In the central image, one figure's toothy mouth is mimicked by the broken line tangent to a knee at the right. 3 Studies for Self-Portrait, 1983. During the past 15 years, Bacon has painted more than 20 self-portraits. The shrillness with which he described the exit from life in the black triptychs eased somewhat in his self-portraits and portraits of the next few years. By the start of the next decade, the sense of sadness that had dominated the work of the early 1970s gave way to a feeling of freshness in such images as 3 Studies for a Portrait of John Edwards of 1984. When you're painting somebody, you know that you are, of course, trying to get near not only to their appearance, but also to the way they've affected you, because every shape has an implication. Study for a Portrait of 1970. Study for a Portrait of 1971. The confrontation with mortality that underlies so many portraits and triptychs of the 70s is amplified in a succession of works that draw on the imagery of Painting 1946 and trace the gloomy course of the Furies. Second version of Painting 1946 was made in 1971 when the Museum of Modern Art in New York seemed reluctant to lend the original version to the Grand Palais for Bacon's retrospective in Paris. The work of 1946 was finally made available for the show, but in the meantime, Bacon had recast the image to ensure its inclusion in one form or another in his exposition, from a vantage point transformed by the intervening 25 years. The composition is more clear and spare, the magenta background replaced by bright yellow. While the musculature of the arms of the split carcass is even more distinctly human than before, the central figure is, quite simply, a different person. Though the eyes remain obscured by the umbrella, his neck no longer bulges brutishly, and he's more relaxed, the growling mouth replaced by a more conversational arrangement of the lips. The laced boots worn by the figure are familiar from images of Lucian Freud and of Bacon himself. Neatly dressed, wearing a raincoat over his suit, he looks more like a banker off to lunch in the rain than a vivacious dictator shrieking at a crowd. The taming of the violent imagery of Painting 1946 continues in Seated Figure of 1978. The figure is enclosed within the familiar linear cube, beyond which 3 pink shades with tassel pulls reiterate the setting of both versions of Painting 1946. But the carcass and the railings skewered with meat have been eliminated. The figure is now dressed in white cricketer's clothes, and his teeth protrude awkwardly rather than menacingly. Below this figure hovers a bust of George Dyer, ideally handsome. With the passing of time, the image of Dyer once again coheres. A cameraman, not Bacon, enters through a darkened doorway into rectilinear space of Triptych of March 1974, the final work of the Black Trilogy. Face and camera merge as they turn their sights toward us. In the left panel, a butcher described with Daumiesque suppleness turns away from us toward a blackened wall and doorway, which mirror the architecture of the camera's space. A figure twists athletically in the central panel, an image of musculature and contrapposto that is timeless, save for the bare light bulb suspended above. 5 years later, after completing the second version of Painting 1946, Bacon returned to the imagery of 1946 to create a triptych that again juxtaposed villain and victim. The central panel of Triptych of 1976 revolves around the image of a headless figure, apparently painted on a canvas or reflected in a mirror. It is seated on a chair, its legs horrifyingly lively in their springiness. In pose and ashen pallor, this figure reads like a curious revamping of the headless, armless, godless, variously identified as Leto or Hestia of the 5th century BC, among the Elgin marbles in the British Museum in London. A bird of prey attacks the decapitated figure, while vulture-like creatures perch on railings. In its suggestion of a living human victim of a predatory bird, the image calls to mind the story of Prometheus. In the foreground, a bowl suggesting both a chalice and a toilet overflows, its contents blood red. The sleek lines and surfaces of the railing establish a counterpoint to the visceral forms of the human